All right, councillors, we resumed. It took a little bit longer than 5 minutes. My apologies. We're just trying to sort out a technical problem with live streaming. So we think it's up and running again. Either way, we'll record the meeting and we'll push on. And I think we were with Councillor Collins and we were working through some questions you have. So if I could have Councillor Collins' mic on, please, and we'll go back to Councillor Collins. Councillor Collins.
I think I'm not sure where I got cut off. I think it was just clarifying the Buffalo Creek parking meters. But I understand that will come back to us shortly anyway. When does the lease end? Because if it's losing money, we should probably just get rid of it. So when is it lease end in September?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll need to take it on notice, but we will come back to council with a report.
All right. Councillor Collins, any further questions?
Yeah, I've got a few more. With the interest income, now with the report we've just passed, there's an estimate that the interest income for the year will be 374,618. Is that correct? It was in the report we just looked at. Actual year to date is 263.85, and projected year-end result is 374,618. Is that for the year, this financial year?
General Manager.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the Director of Finance and Corporate.
So the quarterly report projection, yes, that is the final figure that we're projecting, primarily due to the economic downturn and the interest rates. When we based it on the comparison of the prior 2 years, that we felt that was a realistic estimate.
So we've got the estimate for 2021 as 400,000, and I think it was based on the old figures. And it seems as though over the next 10 years they're indexed at the same rate of indexation, whereas I would have thought interest income, well, it wouldn't ordinarily be indexed because it would be dependent on the interest rates and the cash available. So how is that? Because it's a reasonable amount over the 10 years.
Yep, no, that's true. And what we don't have at our disposal is econometric analysis. But what we are attempting to do this year is have a comprehensive look at the investment policy. We do believe it's a conservative policy, and we will bring back to council a report where we will attempt to increase that income, but obviously in a prudent manner that's still compliant with the Local Government Act.
But wouldn't it to be compliant with the Act, if you've got interest income and you're indexing the revenue from that, shouldn't that, I mean, if we've got deficits, I'm trying to understand how it can go from 400,000 or 374,000 to 493,000 per year with basically the same amount of cash. I mean, it's suggesting interest rates will increase, 2.5% for the next 10 years. I'm just trying to understand the assumptions behind predicting that income, because I don't think you can index, well, you can't index interest. So I'll just flag that, because I think that needs to be looked at and brought back, because it obviously affects the cash flow figures for the forecast. Now,
further questions?
Yeah, I've got a few. Now, footpaths. Now we've got the work schedule starting on page 119, which has the next 4 years of footpath renewals, and I can't see a single renewed footpath on the west of the overpass. Is that actually correct? Am I reading that correctly?
General Manager.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I'll preface that by saying that this, the data in here needs to be updated in line with the new asset management plan, and as council's aware, we're working through that. I'll ask the Director Service Delivery and Special Projects just to elaborate on that.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, we're working with ASCETIC and extracting a capital works program based on condition rating, which we presented a draft to the last councillor briefing. We're further refining that based on feedback, and we intend to bring that back for council's adoption to provide some further detail.
When would that, through you, Mr. Mayor, when would that be coming back? Because if it's going to impact our 10-year plan, I was hoping that data would be included in this budget. I think that was always the goal. Is it behind schedule on, you know, were we hoping to have more data than we've got at the moment?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the intention was to be a bit further than where we are.
Yeah.
Having said that, we didn't anticipate a pandemic.
No, of course.
So to the Director, would you like to provide an update on the time frame?
Yep. Through you, Mr. Mayor, we should be able to get a report through to the next council meeting with an updated capital works program.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, I'm nearly finished. Just one more regarding, and it's more for me to understand these reserves a little bit better. There's an office equipment reserve, and it's not suggests that it's not correct, which has been introduced for $10,000 a year. In the report we've got today on the summary of asset investments, which talks about internal restrictions, we've got a reserve there for office equipment and furniture at 31st of March of 609,000, and it was actually 693,000 at the end of last year, but it went down to $100,000 in the November report. So I just want to understand what it's actually for and how because I assumed when it went down it was because of the refurbishment, which makes a lot of sense. But now it's gone back up again. So I just want to understand so I can see how it fits into the whole budget.
Thank you. General Manager.
Through Mr. Mayor to the Director of Finance.
So office equipment is the generic financial category that's normally ascribed, but that also includes IT costs. So upon reviewing our future IT subscription expenditure, we feel that reserve needs to be replenished at the right rate. So office equipment will include future IT capital programs as well. Okay.
Can we get and maybe this is the report. I might bring this up back when we're going through so I'm trying to understand how it went from 600 to 100 to 600 in the case of sort of number of months, but I'll leave that for the restrictions report. My only other thing is this community survey for $30,000, which I spoke of last year. Now, is that the intention is to do that every single year?
General Manager.
Yeah, through Mr. Mayor, I think we might have discussed this at the Councillor Strategy Weekend when Iris came in to present, and the suggestion was to do it every 2 years rather than annually.
Okay, because I think it's in there for every year.
Right.
No?
Through Mr. Mayor, I'll need to check that detail. Apologise for that.
Okay.
Okay. Well.
Any further questions?
Yeah, I will speak against it, and then I will move a small amendment. So. All right. If I can
go ahead.
I won't be very long. Look, the reason I'm not. First of all, I want to thank the staff for. I understand the monumental amount of work that goes into it. 2,500 line spreadsheet. It is a phenomenal amount of work, and it's a fantastic job. The reason why I'm not supporting it is that we've got a situation here that comes from the 7 councillors, not staff, where the expectation is that you are effectively supposed to be able to pull a rabbit out of a hat. You are told you've got $500,000 to renew a road, to renew roads. And that was set 10 years ago. The question shouldn't be, what can you do with $500,000? The question should be, what needs to be done? And then we discuss how we pay for it or what needs to happen. Now, we've got there. I understand that we're working on the data to get the exact quantified amount of the roads, but it is somewhere in the vicinity. Well, the last financial accounts were reported at 7 million. I think the current ones might be higher or lower. We know that it's in the millions. It's several million. I can't imagine it being less than 7. Same with footpaths. Same with all of them. But still, the renewal program hasn't changed. Now, we go to this survey that we get done for $30,000, and it says the number one source of dissatisfaction on council at 47% is footpath maintenance. It is the biggest source of dissatisfaction for this council at 47%. The next biggest at 44% is traffic and parking around school zones. Now, there's no other source of dissatisfaction in the 40%. Everything else is in the 30s. The biggest thing people want in Hunters Hill, according to this survey, is for the footpaths to be fixed. And still, there is no provision in the long-term financial plan to do this. Now, it's fine to say to staff, okay, you've got $120,000. What do you want to do with it? It's the wrong question to be asking. We need to say what needs to be done, how much will it cost, and then what do we do about it? We had a motion earlier this year about talking about a T-Corp loan to pay for our infrastructure backlog, which we know is beyond what we can afford. That doesn't mean Hunters Hill is a basket case at all. It can be done. It will need to be borrowed and paid off over a period of time. But it needs to be addressed. We can't just ignore it. And we have another year where we're still working on a renewal plan that was set in 2015. And the roads renewal, if we see here, it says yearly program based on current expenditure levels of $500,000 a year. That was set in 2015. Hasn't even been indexed. We've got councillor pays are indexed. It's the only thing, the renewal program isn't indexed. It doesn't grow. And even after we know that, even though we can't quantify exactly what needs to be done, and we will, I expect we will be able to do that in a couple of weeks, and it will be, it'll be a pretty raw truth. We know that it is significantly more than what we are allocating for in the 10-year forward estimates, in the 1-year forward estimates. So the budget doesn't address that issue. So I can't possibly support something that does not address the biggest source of dissatisfaction in the community. It doesn't increase it at all. Now, this community survey, I appreciate that there is a time and a potentially conducting a community survey occasionally, perhaps every 4 years, maybe once a council term, to help a new council to focus. The idea of doing it every year is an absolute and utter waste of money. We could upgrade a playground for that. Now we've got a playground upgrade scheduled for 2025 at Harry Memorial Playground. We could bring that forward if we just get the fact is we haven't even addressed the issues that have been identified in this community survey. What is the point of paying for another one if we haven't even been through it all and discussed how we've addressed it?
Councillor Collins, are you almost finished? You've run out of time. If you've almost finished, I'll let you to continue, or I'll seek an extension.
No, I won't need an extension. I will move some very humble amendments that I hope will. All
right, I'll ask for the extension. Councillors, are you willing to extend Councillor Collins' time a little further?
I'm moving the.
I'll move that we extend it. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Miles, all in favour? It's carried. Go ahead.
Okay. My amendments are to make the community survey once every 4 years, starting in 2024, because we've obviously just done one, and the next one in this would be 2028. I think that's a fair balance between consulting the community and having an opportunity to actually do something about it. Bearing in mind that there's also a great survey of an election that's held where we can hear what the community has to say and the community can have their say as well. So that also happens every 4 years. The next one would be to, with regards to mayoral allowance and the member fees, I understand there's no appetite to cut them. I think they are being right at the far end of what they are, of what we are entitled to, set them at. I propose that we freeze them for the 10 years going forward. That'll save, well, $270,000. So the 10-year saving for making the community survey every 4 years will be $272,000. The mayoral allowance being frozen will save $50,000 over 10 years. The members' fees will save $224,000 over 10 years. And the last one is to reduce the number of conferences that councillors go to. I've left the training budget alone, so I know there's no appetite to do that. And that is basically giving every councillor $1,000 as a delegate expense. If you want to go to a conference, that's your budget. If you want to pay more, that's fine. But it's limiting the junkets, if you will. I've made it clear how I feel about them. I can't get rid of them, so let's just say $1,000 each. That allows us all to go to the LG New South Wales conference or another one of your choosing, and that'll save $61,000 over 10 years. So all up, that would save just over $600,000, and we have no loss in community outcome. It's mainly a loss to the future growth of councillor wages and just spacing out those community surveys just a little further, so that we actually have time. There is no way that you could have time to respond to this survey within a year and get things done where you could have a measurable difference. So I think it's a fair balance between having the survey and having an opportunity to do something in the interim between surveys. Freeze the indexing. Yes.
So can everybody see the proposed amendment? Councillor Collins, does that look correct to you?
Yes, but also I don't want to index the delegate expenses, which it'll have done. So yeah, it would actually save more. But yeah, you don't actually need to put what's saving, but basically just put the make community survey every 4 years. You don't need to say what it saves. starting in 24, because we've just done one. Mayor allowance, proposed to freeze the increase for 10 years going forward. And then by 10 years we'll be more in line with what obviously what we should, and maybe a future council is in a better position and might change that, but for now, reduce that. Reduce the number of conferences council. Maybe not the number of conferences we can attend. We can obviously attend at our own cost, but reduce the budget. Delegates' expenses, I think the line item is to $7,000, $1,000 per councillor per year. Yeah, that should, and you don't need saves over $600,000 because that's, at the community survey before. Yeah, okay, that's fine. So as you can see, it's not actually. First of all, do I have a seconder?
Yes, Councillor Miles has seconded.
Okay, so I'll just briefly explain what this will do is save a significant amount of money. Now, I would like to say, my thought was to, put that into the, into the footpath renewal project. I'm reluctant to do that because I think that we need to balance. I don't want to choose where this money goes, but it would be my intention that the money saved would go into asset renewal. In fact, I might add that in, asset renewal. I just won't specify, which one, although footpaths would be great. So we can just say the money saved to be reallocated to asset renewal. So I'll just briefly speak to it. It's what we are. We're not really cutting anything. We're just stopping increases, putting the lid on some of the costs of at the council level. There is a little bit of cut in delegate expenses, but I think that I think that some councils are passionate enough that they might, if they really want to go to these things, that they should. They can always go on their own. It's a bit of professional development. I don't believe that we should be going interstate for a conference. I just can't see how that's justified considering the situation we're in. But what this does is it's not taking anything away from staff, because that's not my that's not our role to cut staff. I'm sorry, I'm getting cut off here. That's an operational issue. It's a difficult thing for the general manager to start cutting councillor expenses. It's a little bit prickly, and I think it's and I understand why. I think the onus is on us to take leadership in that respect and look at the governance costs and say, all right, well, we obviously need to tighten our belt and reallocate money in different areas. What can we do as councillors? How can we, bear a bit of the load? And these are very humble. This actually won't affect really anyone in the next year anyway, because there is unlikely to be a increase at the remuneration tribunal. So I would like to speak. And by the way, I think considering that it's that really is only.
Councillor, you've run out of time again.
I'll just say.
I'm happy to give you an extension. Do I have a seconder?
Yeah.
Councillor Miles, all in favour?
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
I just want to briefly say that I think that considering that we're not cutting anything from staff or any sort of activities except amongst ourselves, I think that if any councillors were of a mind to not support this and not sort of carry a bit of the load, I would like to think they'd have the courage to sort of to state their reasons on this particular issue, because I think the community would like to see it. That's all I'll say. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, councillor. Anybody wishing to speak in favour of the recommendation? I'm sorry, let's, excuse me, in favour, against the amendment, please, sorry. I've just lost this. Anybody wishing to speak against the amendment? Councillor Sanderson.
Briefly, Mr. Mayor, if we could see them on the screen again. Individually, some of them I have no problem with at all, but it's just the complete suite, having them all thrown in together. The one I strongly object to is reducing, well, it says delegate expenses, but I mean, you know, training is incredibly important to councillors.
It's a separate budget.
Well, just, you know, if we're going to deal with this one, then delete it. We'll deal with that later. Then leaving the next survey to 2024 means the incoming council in 2022, I presume, would not be able to have a survey done for a couple of years. I think a bit more thought needs to go into that, so there is some flexibility in terms of the duration between surveys, so that they can get them in phase with electoral cycles and so on. And maybe 4 years is going a bit long, you know, 2 might be okay. Yeah, look, I'd accept a freeze till the end of the current term, but not indefinitely. I think it's a matter for future councils, not to set that for you know, forevermore. Yeah. But they're my concerns with it as a suite of motions.
Thank you. Anybody wishing to speak in favour of the amendment? Councillor McLaughlin, I think you're in favour of these amendments? Hold on just one minute. Go ahead.
I've just got a couple of questions. If I could, just in relation to that first point with the community surveys. I'm just wondering if Councillor Collins would accept an amendment that said something along the lines of community services surveys be conducted at the commencement of each council term.
Councillor Collins, just one moment.
Rather than 2024, which is a long time away. And as I understand it, the last survey we did was over a year old, or perhaps a year old by the time it came to us in January.
Councillor Collins, we put on the mic for Councillor Collins, please. Councillor Collins, would that amendment be accepted?
I have no issues with that. As long as every 4 years, well, at the start of every council term, that is fine with me.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Back to you, Councillor McLaughlin.
That's all I just wanted to clarify.
All right. Anybody wishing to speak against? For? Councillor Miles, just one moment. Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, obviously Councillor Collins has raised measures like this before, and I do think that this goes to, you know, some quite sensible solutions to some of our budgetary problems, which, you know, as we see from this budget, and you know, things like COVID have been impacting us, but really what we have here is a problem with council's expenditure that we're going to have to deal with one way or another. This, you know, suite of amendments will go a small ways to dealing with some of the larger problems. And I'll preface this by saying that the staff are doing a fantastic job at trying to get this budget pointed in the right direction. It's probably going to also require some pretty hard decisions in the next year. But just on these amendments, they're low impact. They allow us to do our job as we are. They're a freeze to a fairly generous pay in terms of the bracket that we're in, which I personally have no problem with. And the delegate expenses being reduced, that allows us to attend at $1,000, probably attend Local Government New South Wales Conference and the ALGA Conference, if I'm being honest, without the dinner and the other, accoutrement that sort of come along with that. So I think that it's quite sensible. I agree with Councillor McLaughlin's suggestion, though, that a new council would probably benefit from a community survey being conducted early in the term. That's probably a bit more sensible in terms of giving that council direction in terms of moulding their long-term financial plan and community strategic plan in that first session. So I definitely agree with that. But again, these are low impact. I think that they're sensible, and I think that it's the start of very many things that we're going to have to start looking at in terms of tightening the belt on our expenditure and looking for alternative revenue sources.
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody wishing to speak against the amendment? Councillor Crassley.
I just wanted to follow up on Councillor Sanderson's point about the 10 years for the mayoral and member fee allowances, and I wondered whether Councillor Collins would consider 5 years, which takes us to a year into the council after next. So that would mean you'd basically have the rest of our term on council and the rest of the next council's term, and then the following council would have some time to then perhaps decide what they'd like to do it down the track on that, in line with LG New South Wales, perhaps. That would be the only item on there that I think would be a little fairer to councils down the track.
Just a moment, Councillor Collins, we'll get your mic on. Councillor Collins.
Considering that, look, yes, I will accept it because I think it should be 10, but if we can get this through today, I think that's fantastic, and I think that will leave an opportunity for another council in the future to make that decision. 5 years is I would like it to be 10, but I will take 5 if we can get this across the line tonight. Absolutely, we can revisit next year.
Thank you. So, have we got anybody wishing to speak against? Anybody for? Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't think council can bind future councils to positions that those councils in the future will make their own decisions based on the financial arrangements and issues around their the situation. So I'm ambivalent about it because I think it will be up to the individual councils in the future to manage those issues. As we've heard, the savings are not great, and I think the biggest issue that we need to deal with to ensure our budget is sustainable in the future is the asset management plan, and I think that will give us a fantastic insight to our expenses and how we move forward in the future. It's an excellent piece of work, and it will give us a fundamental position to leverage our future budgets off. But I don't think we can bind other councils, and we can't. So by passing this, it is really just reflecting on what we think as a council, and I'm comfortable with that. But yeah.
All right. So Is that the only, may I ask a question for my clarification? Is that the only point in the amendment that you are unable to accept? Could you put councillor?
Are you referring to myself?
Yeah,
I'm not saying.
Is the second point, is that the only one you're unable to accept?
It's not that I'm unable to accept. I'm just saying that you can't bind future councils to a position. We can only set the agenda for what we believe is appropriate. And as I say, these are not large amounts of money. And the big issue that we need to address is the very impressive data that we have coming towards us in relation to the asset management plan and the innovations and the opportunity which that provides.
Thank you, councillor. So, councillors, is there any further discussion required on this amendment? Councillor Collins, back to you. I'm sorry, councillor Sanderson. Have you already spoken on this? I think you've already spoken.
I'll frame this as a question, if I could, to Councillor Collins through you, if I could.
Go ahead.
Would Councillor Collins consider the last point, the $1,000 per councillor per year, to make that to $1,500? Because I think that would give you far better opportunity in the training area to attend conferences and so on.
Well, no, I won't, because there is a separate training budget for councillors, which, had I known the appetite for tonight, I probably would have brought that as well. That's still, I think, far too high. I think it's about $14,000 across the council. So you get, there's about $2,000 per councillor for training. There's also a statutory requirement there as well. So it's more difficult to sort of to limit. So you can certainly use that budget, Councillor Sanderson, to go on any conferences or junkets or whatever you choose to do with it. So you basically end up about $3,000 each, which is plenty. And I would imagine that we
Point of order, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Councillor Sanderson, point of order.
Yes, look, I have some concern about Councillor Collins suggesting that I would go on a junket. At the end of the day, I've attended quite a number of things which I've paid for out of my own pocket. I think probably to a greater extent than any other councillor. So I'd ask Councillor Collins if you could ask Councillor Collins to withdraw that comment, please.
Yeah, absolutely. That wasn't. I wasn't intending to suggest you attend junkets. So I withdraw that, and that wasn't.
Thank you, Councillor Collins.
So yes, that's withdrawn.
Is there anything else you'd like to say to conclude?
No, I will say that it is not a modest. I will just say it's not a modest saving. Once we tally it up, we'll find that it's we're in a much better position. And so yeah, it's a great. I'm glad that we're getting some movement on this. So I commend the amendment.
All right, I'll put the amendment. Those in favour of the amendment? That's carried. It's unanimous. Thank you very much, Councillor Collins. So, are there any further amendments anybody wants to make? So the amendment, Councillor Sanderson.
Look, at this point in time, they're more a question. I think all councillors saw what I sent through to the General Manager today. I just wanted to clarify, there was a table headed, this relates to the third attachment, being the CSP, which has been amended as published in or there's a draft that has some amendments in it that's been published in the papers tonight. There's a table headed maintain character and manage growth planning, which in the latest amendment or the draft amendment has omitted about 3 classes of strategic objective. Could we confirm that all 3 of those will be in the CSP?
General Manager.
Through Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Sanderson, for sending that through today. when we reviewed the document, we found that in the reformatting of it, we missed a table. So they've been reinserted, and I believe an updated document was emailed to the councillors late this afternoon with the missing tables. If we're still missing elements, it's not intentional. So if that has happened, please let me know.
All right, good. The second part that I raised also was to do with the possibility of residential use at Gladesville Hospital. I think you've answered that about it being in the LSPS. My concern there is whether that's inconsistent with the wishes of the community, who I think have expressed as one of its strongest views that heritage above all else must be preserved. So I wonder whether with that doubt, it might be as well to include the one amendment, or at least one amendment, that being the last point, that the draft community strategic plan update be brought back to council for endorsement before further publication.
General Manager.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that would be normal practice, that following public exhibition, that a report be brought back to council, and we seem to have dropped that one off to Councillor Sanderson on this report, so thank you for picking that one up for us.
Okay, all right. Well, if I have those assurances, I guess there's no need to amend, but I just felt that they're important points to make.
Yep. All right, thank you. We'll follow that up. Now, the amendment being one, the amendment becomes a motion. One moment. Councillor McLaughlin.
It's just to clarify what Councillor Sanderson was discussing just about the Gladesville Hospital site. I think having the word residential in that particular line item, it raises a red flag to me, and I think it would raise a red flag to the community that we were working towards something that we never want to happen on the Gladesville Hospital site. So I'm just wondering if that can be reviewed and taken out. And I think, certainly the other things that talk to community, cultural and recreational uses. I just think residential sends the wrong impression.
General Manager.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The updates in the operating plan reflect actions that came out of the local strategic planning statements that have been adopted, as well as some actions that came out as a result of the community satisfaction survey, as well as some feedback that was received from councillors following our strategy session at the end of February. In relation to Gladesville Hospital, there are actions within the adopted local strategic planning statement. And I might ask the Director of Development and Regulatory Services just to refer to those in terms of 3.4, just to clarify the intent, and 3.1 and 6.2 in the LSPS. Thank you, Director.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. In the LSPS, the General Manager is correct, where there was page 45, there's a whole page on the Gladesville Hospital precinct that talks about the master plan and heritage and character. There was submission put in by the property department with regard to this site, and that was detailed in our LSPS report, which was recently approved by the council. With regard to the actions, and in the actions on page 59, item 3.4 identifies the delivering housing, community of culture and recreational solutions to the formal Gladesville site. So it's basically highlighting in detail the retention of the character and the landscaping importance, and also when viewed from the water as well.
Does that answer your question, Councillor McLaughlin?
Well, yes, it does. I guess we missed it in the LSPS, but I think that would be something that would be very controversial on that site.
Okay, thank you. I'll take it back to Councillor Collins. Councillor Collins, Councillor Williams, do you have a question?
Are you dealing with the whole motion now or with the amendment?
I'm turning it back to Councillor Collins. The amendment being one, the amendment becomes a motion. So back to Councillor Collins to speak to the amended motion, which is the motion. So Councillor Collins.
Yeah, I've got a question, if I may, Mr. Mayor, before you do that.
Councillor Williams.
One of the questions is now been resolved, that I was a bit concerned about the detail and the content in the draft community strategic plan. So it's heartening to hear that that will be addressed and brought back to council. And as I heard, it will go back out on public exhibition before the matter's finalised, because there are issues in there which I'm not going to go into now, but need to be addressed in the process. And as we're now committing the motion, I'd like to ask a question through you, Mr. Mayor, of the General Manager, in relation to the quantum of the deficit proposed in the budget. It's stated at 793,000. Seeing we were tracking pretty well this year to get to a surplus, is it fair to assume that that quantum is associated with the COVID-19 process, or is there an underlying issue there that's not identified? Because I think that if it is a COVID-driven deficit, then I think it's important for the community to understand that, and I think councillors need to be aware of where we sit in terms of our financial management.
General Manager.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll ask the Director Corporate and Finance to elaborate. But as council's aware, we have been working towards our sustainable and thriving strategy, and that has involved driving down expenditure and driving up revenue, and also focusing on the three areas around shared services, around our asset management plan, and also around our property strategy. And they're three key elements of our strategy going forward. In terms of the projected deficit, we were on track. Sorry, councillors, can you please mute Councillor Williams? We were on track for a much better result in 2021. However, we've had to revise our forecasts because of reductions in revenue, and also take a conservative approach because we don't know what the future holds. We've based our projections on the experience over the last 6 weeks and anticipating and trying to extrapolate that out into what the next 6 months, 12 months might look like. And as part of that 6-month forecast, we've also included waiving of higher fees for sporting clubs, of community groups, of community facilities, of on-street dining, as well as reduced revenues of development activity as well as compliance activity. So we've taken a very, I think, conservative approach, knowing that we don't know what the future holds for us at the moment. I'll ask the Director, Finance and Corporate Strategy to elaborate on what would have been our world if COVID hadn't impacted on us. Director.
Thank you. So that's largely correct. We have taken a fairly conservative approach, particularly in the income space, going through some of the listed items that where we started the journey, and COVID and not just COVID, the economic downturn is where our estimates have been on, and we are expecting reductions apart from those COVID elements. Also in DA fees, we expect to see a reduction. For this year, we also expect to see a reduction in the investment income, despite any changes we do to the policy, specifically because of the economic downturn. So that's been a large driver in that figure that we have this year.
Okay. Councillor Williams, you got the answer to that?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, it's clear from the General Manager that we've got a whole lot of settings in place to ensure our financial stability, but there's a lot of uncertainty being driven by external factors. So I thank her for her efforts.
All right. Now, I'd like to go back to Councillor Collins because we actually have an amended motion on the table. Councillor Collins, it's back to you. Do you want to speak further on the amended motion?
Can I just clarify? I thought that the original mover of the motion then.
Yep. The original mover was me.
Yeah.
But when you amend the motion, the amended motion becomes the motion, and the motion is with you as the motion. So if you'd like to speak further on it. So what we've really dealt with at this stage is the amendment to the motion. If there's anything further you want to speak about, which is in the motion proper, you can speak to that now too, as well as anything else you want to say. So it's back to you.
Well, I suppose I'll wait for right of reply, but I think everybody else will go through, I imagine.
Right. Is there anybody wishing to speak any further on this? Councillor Miles. Please go ahead.
Just a point of clarification through you, Mr. Mayor, to the General Manager. So is it suggested, as per your answer to Councillor Williams, that the projections that were in the last report, that we have a financial, the COVID impact was a projected decrease of $155,000? Are you saying that the impact of COVID to our budget is going to be greater than that, which was in the quarterly budget review?
General Manager.
Through Mr. Mayor, no. What I'm suggesting is in the draft budget that is before the council, the reason for the increased deficit is a revision of revenue forecast as a result of COVID. What we anticipate may be the case over the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, and just going on from that, and you may be able to clarify this for me. The emergency services projected expenditure hasn't gone down, but I believe that there has been announcement by the state government that we're going to receive some form of relief for that. Is that because they're going to rebate that in some way, or is that something that needs to be changed before this is going out to public?
General Manager.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the state government have announced that they will freeze the freeze the emergency services levy. Even though it's going up, we will pay the current rate. I'll just ask the director to elaborate on that.
Yeah, so the figure we put in was based on last year's receipt. What the announcement was that they would rebate the increase. So we've just taken the conservative estimate that and based it on last year's spend. And what we believe that we'll still have to pay this year.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Miles?
Yes. I might speak to the motion, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
A lot of work's gone into this, and obviously we would have liked to have had a better operating result, but as we sort of move forward into this next 10-year of forecasts, it's going to be an interesting time. It's nice to see things like the changes we're making to the library service span out, the savings that we're going to be associated with that, savings that are going to be associated with things like the shared depot arrangement. I think that there's some things that we're going to be looking at over the next couple of months with the property strategy, which, as all councillors know, I'm quite passionate about. It's going to be a balance, and I think that the amendments that were put by Councillor Collins tonight are probably the beginning of striking that balance between cutting expenditure and looking for alternative revenue resources. The projected budget deficits that we've seen previously and delivering again this year are chewing away at our strategic reserves in a way that we have to stem as quickly as possible. And, you know, if we don't take a bit of action in the next couple of years, we're on borrowed time with deficits of this size. So I would flag that although we've taken a couple of measures that are seeing us trend in the right direction, there's going to be a lot of work to be done, particularly in the next year, but even further than that, in both cutting expenditure and raising potential other sources of income. The asset management plan hasn't been finalised yet. I think that is also going to change the way that we look at this budget. That document is going to be pretty crucial in the way that we interact with the community and how we finance things moving forward. I know that we've talked about potentially using the loans that are available through T Corp to do some of that work and provide the infrastructure that's required. But this document's going to have to be amended quite substantially once that asset management plan is made very clear, and we know where we need to spend money to reduce that significant backlog that we have. But I commend the staff on putting together what is obviously a very complex document. I would have liked to have not seen such a significant deficit, but that being said, you know, I prefer for us to be conservative and deliver better outcomes than the other way around. It is the case, though, that we are going to have to make some fairly substantial decisions about our financial future moving forward, because the projections that are outlined in this document don't paint a rosy picture for us. And it's fairly clear that some things need to change, and Council's going to have to roll its sleeves up and do that.
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody wishing to speak against the motion? For the motion? I'll put the recommendation with the amendments. Those in favour? Against? That's carried unanimously.
I believed I had right of reply there, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, you go ahead for your right of reply.
I would just briefly say that I will support this because of the tremendous amount of work that's gone into it. Now that I know that the asset management plan and the state of our assets will be coming to the next meeting in 2 weeks, that will come throughout the consultation of this. I'm happy for this document to go out to consultation, and I would envisage significant changes. Well, once consultation has happened and we have transparency, well, not transparency, but understanding of our asset situation. So because it's coming in 2 weeks, I think we have an opportunity to take this out to the community. They can see how things are. We will also have the information on the assets in 2 weeks, so we'll be able to combine that, and then we can have a full and frank discussion about what we're going to do or plan for the next 10 years in terms of renewing our assets. So I commend the motion.
Could I just confirm the vote to which we've taken? All in favour? That's carried. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. We move on to 4.3, the draft boat trailer policy. Moved Councillor Miles, seconded Councillor Sanderson. Councillor Miles. Please go ahead.
This is obviously something that I've raised several times before, and it's been a long-running issue in streets like Park Road and Joubert Street, north and south. It's a sensible policy. I think it goes a long way to delivering the sort of outcomes that were delivered in places like Canada Bay, which the General Manager will be aware of, where you see people often from out of area or from different parts of the municipality parking their boats for substantial amounts of time in front of people's houses, and they do inevitably get frustrated with that. The policy recognises the pedestrian and vehicle safety aspect of view loss from parking bulky trailers with boats on them as well. And I think that it's important that we are able to use this policy to identify those that are storing trailers in and around Hunters Hill where they shouldn't, and prosecute them as per the policy. So I commend the staff on delivering this, but I think that also we just need to make sure that this is rolled out in a sensible way.
Thank you. Anybody wishing to speak against? For? Councillor Sanderson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, one of the things I'd like to comment on is I think the amendments that have come into this have sensibly dealt with the submissions that have been made. The other point I'd make is that I think over time in areas, particularly around Woolwich, around the marinas, we have trailers left that are, are a considerable problem to our residents there. There are other measures that we will need to carry on from this. So, look, I say that this is a great start. We should have done it a bit earlier, but I commend the motion.
Anybody wishing to speak against? For? Councillor Williams, sorry. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I think this is a great initiative and a great policy to put in place for our community. Nobody wants people parking boats in front of their house if they don't have opportunity to park their own vehicles or their neighbours to park their vehicles in the street. And we've heard all the issues about safety, etc. I've got one question that relates to the changes that are being proposed in terms of special circumstances. What happens if somebody does achieve special circumstances? Does that mean that that person's then allowed to park their boat in front of somebody else's house and inconvenience those residents? How does that work and how is that decided?
General Manager.
Through Mr. Mayor to the Director of Development.
Through you, Mayor. There's a process of contact. You can nominate your adjoining owner or across the road, but they need concurrence and approval. They can possibly ask to put their boat nearby a park or near their property. So that's the circumstances we have to consider. It's not automatic that you can park. It's not automatic if you can't park your boat outside your house because of circumstance and you park it outside somebody's house. That's not the case. The case is needs to look at the criteria with regard to and also approval from the person's property adjoining or across the road.
Thank you. Anybody wishing to speak against? For? Can I put the recommendation? I'll put the recommendation. Those in favour? That's carried unanimous. Thank you very much. I'll move on to item 4.4. I have a speaker for 4.4. Just one moment. Please go ahead.
This is from Stewart Island. He's a supporter and the address is, as the PNF executive of Villa Maria, we have worked with council for at least 18 months in trying to find a safe way for our children to cross at or near the intersection of Mary Street and Knight Street safely. We are so pleased when we heard that the pedestrian crossing for this intersection had been approved. We understand this was recommended by the local Traffic Advisory Committee in March 2019 and approved by Council 24 June 2019. Two of our parents spoke at the meeting on 9 March 2020, 12 months after the recommendation for the crossing to proceed was made, including a parent whose child was hit when crossing after school, and he was crossing in the safest possible way, holding the hand of his mother. As you can imagine, many children try to cross this intersection, often on their own or on bikes or scooters. During the meeting on 9 March 2020, Council discussed approving funding the crossing immediately. As we understand, it was instead decided to look further at funding options and revert in 2 weeks. As you know, COVID-19 lockdowns commenced shortly after, and this issue has not been discussed since. Over 2 months has passed. Whilst this issue was included in the agenda finally for the meeting on 27 April 2020, Council ran out of time. It is now on the agenda for tonight, and we, as a parent body for Villa Maria, strongly request that children's safety be considered a priority, not pushed back again for further review, discussion, or left to be dealt with at another meeting after other issues are discussed. But Council take the right approach and immediately proceed with building and funding this crossing. Our children start returning to school from this week, and the serious threat to their safety remains. Many children have spent their time in isolation, walking and riding their bikes in their local Huntersville streets. We fear many children will now feel that they can walk or ride to and from school, and yet this intersection remains of serious concern. We are willing to do all we can to work with Council on progressing this issue, but as local residents, ratepayers and parents, we ask that Council prioritise this significant matter of children's safety. Thank you.
Councillor Collins.
Yes, I'd like to move, but I would like to, if I have a seconder.
Seconded, Councillor Williams.
I would just like to if we could talk through this. I want to support the recommendation as it is. I'm not sure. I think the intention was to fund it out of general reserves. I just want the general manager to clarify that this shifting of out of the footpath project from Massey to Cal does not take anything away permanently from Gladesville, who have been waiting on that for a while.
General Manager.
You want me to talk through us? Talk it through. Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor. In providing funds for projects, it's important to actually identify a funding source rather than just general revenue or our reserves. And the point was made before about eating into our reserves, which is they're there for our larger and strategic projects. With the projects that were identified as a funding source, that was done in consultation with the Director Service Delivery, and it was felt that they were the best two projects to source the funds from. I might ask the Director Service Delivery just to explain some of the thinking behind that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. These two projects are projects that we haven't yet proceeded with. So the intention is we're awaiting the resolution of the RMS Active Transport Program funding. So once we're advised of that, if it's successful, then we reimburse those funds. If it's unsuccessful, then we could look at how to replenish those funds when we're ready to proceed with those projects.
One moment, Councillor Collins.
Councillor
Collins, do you have another question?
My understanding is that the paving on that strip from Massey to Cal is on hold. Why is that again? Is it to? Are we waiting for something to happen?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the Director.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's on hold due to development applications, I understand, through the Development Department.
I just add to that, Mr. Mayor. So we're reluctant to put in a new footpath where there was still construction works occurring.
Okay. Look, for the sake of getting this through, I will yes, I will support this because this is so long overdue. I want to, and to those in Gladesville, I don't want anyone to feel as though that money is being taken away permanently. I intend to bring that back and get that replenished, but I don't want to fiddle around with reserves tonight and to the detriment of actually getting this crossing done. So because that footpath is not going to be done immediately and we need to do this crossing as soon as possible, we should have done it years ago. I'm going to support the motion with that reallocation of reserves, even though I fundamentally disagree with defunding that project because it still needs to be done. But that I will take that as a fight for another day, because this involves children's safety. So let's just get that done, and we can discuss that issue at a meeting in the near future.
Thank you. Is there anybody wishing to speak against?
Not against, Mr. Mayor. I just have a question. Clarification. Just simply the $5,000 that's coming from the Capital Works program at Henley and Huntley Cove. Is that because there's excess available in those funds over what those projects have cost?
Through Mr. Mayor, to the Director. George.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there is additional funds for this financial year allocated to that traffic facilities project. So again, with the same as the other allocations, the intent is to reimburse those funds once, hopefully, the RMS application is successful.
If we get further clarification, is that going to delay the works in Henley or Huntley's Cove, or Huntley's Point rather?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, not any scheduled works for this financial year.
Good, thank you.
Anybody wishing to speak against? For? Councillor Crasso, one moment. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question. I was sort of reading it, and I might have missed if someone had already asked this. Do we have full approval yet to start building the crossing immediately? Just in reference to the speaker who we heard read out earlier. Do we have full approval to start building immediately?
Through Mr. Mayor, to the Director, if you could please explain the process.
Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we have applied to Ausgrid, so we're in the final stages. That process is in Ausgrid's hands at this stage. We're being told it can take 2 to 3 months for approval. But definitely our consultants are working with them to speed that up as much as possible.
Okay.
All right, any further questions? Anybody? Councillor Williams, question?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I'm just wondering, through you to the General Manager, are there plans around that show the design that's proposed here? There were some 12 months ago or whatever. Have they changed? Do we have detailed plans?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll ask the Director to talk through the process we've been through and then where we're up to and what's next. Thanks, Director.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So the matter was tabled to Traffic Committee in post-July consultation. So that was in 19 September 2019. The Council then adopted the minutes 28 October 2019. And subsequently we commenced detailed design. The resolution was subject to detailed design being approved through RMS. So we've been through that process. And the next stage of that process was to obtain Ausgrid approval.
Mr. Mayor, I was just wondering if the current design could be circulated amongst councillors or made available for people to see, because I don't recall seeing that. Doesn't change delivery of the project, but it just gives a bit of clarity as to exactly what we're going to deliver when we can deliver it.
Yes, I'll ask the General Manager to do that. Thank you. Anybody else wishing to speak for or against? Right reply, Councillor Collins.
I'll just briefly, in the conclusion, we've got the remaining $20,000 to be sourced from the renewal of footpath project. That's certainly not something that I think should be done. But again, we need to pass this tonight, and then we will revisit refunding those particular projects, because we're not going to defund footpaths. We need to do the opposite. But for tonight, so we can get this moving, seems nobody's spoken against it, so it looks like it's going to pass, which is fantastic. The school have been asking, and the parents have been asking this for a long time, and it's a great outcome. And then I will have another look at these reserves and potentially bring something back to the next council meeting about potentially funding them in a different way. But other than that, thank you. I commend the motion.
Right, I'll put the recommendation there on page 247. All in favour? Against? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. Move to 4.5, the Disability Inclusion Action Plan 50% report. Moved Councillor Crassoy, seconded Councillor McLaughlin. Councillor Crassoy. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you to the General Manager and the staff who've given us this 50% report on the progress of the Disability Inclusion Action Plan. I would just like to congratulate the Council on the way we're working through the first recommendations of the first plan. But what I also like is the way as they're working their way through it, they're identifying opportunities to continue to improve on it and to improve on our next plan. For example, suggesting key performance indicators and why we have them and how they're useful, and then additional actions from them, and the opportunities that these will add to our existing actions already, and maximise their effectiveness. So I just, there is just one, for example, just to give you an example, item on page 265 of the papers, item 13, where, for example, it says, review whole of route accessibility along key active movement corridor, etc. Now, it hasn't been completed yet, but they're already suggesting some key performance indicators there and how we could actually improve on rolling those ideas out. Supporting local community transport like Strider to maximise the service to the residents. And I also wonder whether there's opportunity to support Strider with our local business connections as well, to add some shared value so that an organisation like Strider can actually continue to stay afloat and therefore continue to deliver to our residents. So, you know, there's lots of, all the councillors will have read it and it's online for the community to read, but I just think that's added a really good element to rolling out the rest of our DAP and actually to the next one we have. Just one question I have through you, Mr. Mayor, to the General Manager. I'm wondering about the opportunities that some of the grant funding that the state government are giving us, and I'm sure the council officer has pounced on some of them already, but for example, there was one I was looking at earlier about the streets and shared spaces grants, and whether there are, and there's other ones around roads and infrastructure, and I'm wondering, can we be nimble enough? For example, the streets and shared spaces grants finish, I think, on Friday the 10th of May. Can we be nimble enough to leverage off the fact that we have this DF in place to be able to say, we have a plan, here's what we'd like to do, how do we make our streets safer for actually all of our pedestrians, for example, the overpass, but actually for people with any kind of disability to feel safe walking around in the community, or getting around in the community, I should say.
General Manager.
Yep, through you, Mr. Mayor. We have pounced on that. So we've actually got a brainstorming session tomorrow afternoon with the leadership team. So we'll feed that into the project that we work up to be submitted.
I'm not surprised. I shouldn't have even asked. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Anybody wishing to speak against? For Councillor Williams. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to echo the comments of Councillor Crassoy. It is refreshing to see how much progress can be made on important issues like this. I counted up 31 of the 54 actions have already been completed. And as Councillor Crassoy mentioned, we're learning from the process as we go along and enhancing what we're trying to achieve. So I congratulate the staff on what is a very good piece of work. The only comment I'd like to make and a question. I thought in terms of page 253, I thought we dealt with this copyright issue in previous meetings. To me, this is an inclusive report, whereas the copyright issue seems to be excluding people from the process. So I was just wondering whether some attention could be given to that page to ensure that the document is inclusive.
Yep. Thank you. We'll review that. Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Sanderson.
I wonder whether I could suggest an amendment that would take care of Councillor Williams' concerns.
You can.
I sent that through to the General Manager late this afternoon. Unfortunately, I didn't send it to others. But just to add I did have it read, but just to add that point too, because I think there were a couple of points. We got the acknowledgement of country wrong, and also the point that Councillor Williams makes, the copyright should be separated from the acknowledgement of country. They're two quite very different and quite distinct things, and that that an appropriate form of copyright would be some form of Creative Commons, because at the end of the day, we'd encourage people to share this document as far as possible. So that's the amendment I'd like to put, as you see on the screen at the present time.
Councillor Crassler, would you be happy to incorporate that amendment in the recommendation? Could we have Councillor Crassler's microphone, please?
Thanks,
Councillor
Mr. Mayor.
Crassler.
Yeah, of course I would. I completely agree, as I did last time with that amendment on our other reports. Thank you, Councillor Sanderson, for picking it up again.
All right. Councillor, is there any further discussion required? Councillor Crassler.
If there was no further discussion, Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to add in, I guess,
I'll give you right to reply if there's no further discussion. Right to reply.
Thank you. Just to also acknowledge the Access, Inclusion and Seniors Advisory Committee. I don't know if I got that wording around the right way because it changed and it's a long title. And the support that they've given in the development of the original DAP and the rolling out of this one, and they're constantly trying to keep council updated with issues that they identify and wanting to stay abreast of our priorities there. So congratulations and thanks to that committee as well.
Thank you. I'll put the amended recommendation. Those in favour? Against? That's carried. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. 4.6. The assignment of road reserve lease 1 Vernon Street, Hunters Hill. Moved Councillor Williams, seconded Councillor Miles. Councillor Williams, do you wish to speak to that? One moment.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I don't want to speak to it, Mr. Mayor. It's straightforward. It's just a transfer of a lease, and there's no repercussions as a result of it.
Anybody wishing to speak against? I'll put the recommendation there on page 303. Those in favour? Against? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. We move to 4.7, licence deed between trustees of Maris Fathers for the Province of Australia and the Hunters Hill Council for right of footway Jolly Parade, Hunters Hill. Moved Councillor Crassoy, seconded Councillor Williams.
That was the other way around.
Sorry?
Councillor Williams and Crassoy.
Could you turn on both the mics? I was looking down. Was it Councillor Williams that moved it and Councillor Crassoy that seconded it?
Mr. Mayor, I'm happy for Councillor Crassoy.
No, I think I was looking the other way. Thank you, Councillor Williams. Do you want to speak to this?
Only to the fact that that's an important right-of-way for the community to access the Tarpon Creek and Riverglades Reserve. I must confess I use it every day in my walks. So I think it's important that we get a clear recognition of access through that area. The only thing I would comment on is the state of that access lane is not in very good condition.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillors, is anybody wishing to speak against this? Any further discussion required? I'll put the recommendation. Those in favour? Against? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Move to 4.8, summary of council investments as at 29 February 2020 and 31 March 2020. Moved Councillor Collins, seconded Councillor Williams. Councillor Collins, would you like to speak to this?
Just to get clarification on something regarding the internal restrictions. We've got listed here in this report, and I touched upon this earlier. We've got office equipment and furniture at $609,000, but in the February report, which was the number at 30th of November, the figure is 104,790. Now it was over 600,000 at the end of last financial year, according to the financial reports. So I just want to understand, and I figured it went down because of the the town hall and getting new equipment. I'm just trying to understand how these reserves go up and down. So maybe you could just talk us through it, how it went from 6 to 1 to 6.
General Manager.
Yeah. Through Mr. Mayor, I'll ask the Director of Finance and Corporate Strategy to respond.
Yes, this is primarily when we wrote the report initially, this was to go to the last council meeting. We did some further work on the capital projects for IT. Some of those capital projects for this year are moving over to next financial year, but there is an increased investment in capital IT projects. So that classification also takes in those IT projects, IT investments.
Councillor Collins?
I understand what's that it might cover at IT as well. What I'm trying to understand is how a reserve goes from 600,000 at 30 June last year down to 104,000 at November last year and back up to 609,000. I'm just trying to follow how these reserves work, because when does if we have a reserve, how does it get depleted, and then how does it get topped up? So I would have thought it could only get topped up at the end of with a new budget allocation. Is that right? Or
we do adjustments at quarterly review. In terms of the November figure, I would have to take that on notice though. The November, not being here at that time, I would like to take that one on notice. But generally speaking, through the quarterly review process, there should be some adjustments made.
Would it be possible for these reports to, or at least for the next one, to have a comparative, so we can see the change in reserves? That'd be possible.
General Manager?
Yes.
Yes, we can do that.
And then maybe bring back whether it's a briefing or something. I just want to understand how they move around, because it seems unusual, but I'm sure there's a good explanation for it. So for the next meeting, maybe just bring, if we could just get that clarified.
Yes, we'll do that.
Okay, great.
All right, so any further discussion required? I'll put the recommendation. Those in favour? Against? That's carried unanimous again. We move to 4.9, report on legal matters.
Mr. Mayor,
Councillor Collins.
I just want to say I think this is carried over. I declared a non-pecuniary, non-significant interest last time, and I will for this as well.
All right, thank you, Councillor.
And I think the two after that. So anyway.
All right, thank you. Do I have a mover for this recommendation? Councillor McLaughlin, seconded Councillor Williams. Councillor McLaughlin, do you wish to speak to this?
No, not necessary.
Councillors, any discussion required? Councillor Williams.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, just a quick question. There's reference in the tables that agreements have been reached in relation to these matters, but there's no detail as to what those agreements are. I was wondering, because it's saying that those matters are now concluded through agreements, it would be of interest and importance to know why or what has been resolved, because in many cases there have been contentious issues.
General Manager.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we I'll speak with the director and make that information available to the councillors.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any further discussion, councillors? I'll put the recommendation. It's a receive and note. Those in favour? Against? That's carried unanimous. Thank you. 4.10, minutes of the Gladesville Main Street Committee. Moved Councillor Crassoy, seconded Councillor McLaughlin. Councillor Crassoy.
Mr. Mayor, I think there was a speaker on this.
I've got two speakers for 4.11. Is there a speaker for this? No, we don't have a speaker for this.
Oh, no, that one's to the Traffic Committee. I apologise. Sorry, yeah.
Okay. Any further discussion?
Yes, there is just a correction, and with my apology, the council officer sent it to me, and I just missed this. That she's in the minutes of the meeting. It's referred to as Flagstaff. The report refers to Flagstaff parking, but actually that's Cal Street parking at Signal Hill car park. Where's it gone? On page 322, item D, parking proposal, it should say Cal Street. And it's the Signal Hill car park.
Okay, so you pick that up in the next set of minutes as an amendment to the... Yeah. All right, any further discussion required, councillors? I'll put the recommendation. Those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you. 4.11. We have two speakers for 4.11, and if I could ask for that to be read, please. Thank you.
The first is from Mr. Shen Zhao, who's an objector. We are writing to you as the residents of 5C Woolwich Road, Hunters Hill. We would like to object to the proposal to install a no stopping zone adjacent to our property. If installed, we believe this may put us at risk in our property of being devalued. Our house contains garages that fit 6 parking spots. Additionally, we have ample space inside our gate, which can fit up to 10 to 12 cars in total. There is ample parking inside our house for our guests not to have to park on the adjacent street. Since we have moved into this residence, our guests have not parked on the adjacent street parking. Additionally, our neighbours should have plenty of space inside their property to allow their guests to park inside their homes. We believe a good proposition may be to inform our neighbours of the risks of the current street parking and monitor this as we go. We hope you would strongly take our opinion into consideration, as our property would be one of the most affected if this goes ahead. Look forward to your feedback on this. Kind regards.
Thank you. Do you have another?
This one is from Jan Clark, and Jan is a supporter. 24/4, 3 and 2 hour parking respectively, 40% and 60%, which I think would be a good result. The electronic monitoring continues to be successful in avoiding long-term parking, which is appreciated by most surrounding business people I have spoken to. Everyone is strictly limited to 2 hours, and so a larger percentage of 3-hour spaces would, in my opinion and those I've spoken to, represent a good balance between providing a reasonable facility for those wishing to transact business or shopping in the area for a longer period than 2 hours, and keeping vehicle turnover at a high level to provide more spaces more often. I am respectfully requesting that Council consider this compromise proposal. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. So the recommendations there on 325. Moved Councillor Williams, seconded Councillor Collins. Is that correct?
No, Mr. Mayor, I'm moving a separate motion, not that one.
All right. So, what's your amendment? That's a recommendation that the minutes and recommendation be adopted.
I'm going to move that the recommendations in the Local Traffic Committee held on the 19th of March 2020 be deferred to the next council meeting, to allow the details associated with each issue to be presented to councillors.
Do you have a seconder for that? Councillor Collins? Seconder, Councillor Collins. Councillor Williams, any further discussion?
Only to expand on that, Mr. Mayor, the report that we have before us, the minutes of the meeting, are fine, except when you look at the details that support those minutes, there's only a photograph. There's no details as to the justification that they considered in arriving at those decisions. And we've heard tonight from several residents that they have concerns about the outcome. So it's hard for me to make a decision to adopt these without knowing the details behind them.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Could we bring that up on the screen, please, when you're ready? Councillor Williams, does that look correct to you?
Be deferred to the next council meeting to allow details associated with each should be to be provided to councillors. Yep.
All right.
That's true.
Councillors, any further discussion required? Councillor Collins. Just one moment, Councillor. Please go ahead.
Yes, look, this meeting took place by a sort of wasn't in person. It was at the commencement of the COVID. So one of the things, and I think it's been raised before at these local traffic committee meetings, is that as far as RMS are concerned, as far as the police are concerned, and as far as the local member would be concerned, is that the consultation should have taken place before it comes to traffic committee. The traffic committee should be, my understanding is that it should be to find out whether something is safe and doable, but consultation should take place. I don't recall hearing this from this submission when we voted on this matter at the by email. So I just want to maybe draw attention to that, so that we make sure that the traffic committee is a technical. It is a technical committee, assuming that the consultation's been done and everybody's happy with it, whether or not it can proceed based on technical reasons. So I support Councillor Williams's motion to bring this back and perhaps get some more consultation on these particular issues. I know in the past sometimes things have probably gone through a little quicker than they should have. So there are some traffic issues up at Glaysville Road that probably got through the keeper. But anyway, yeah, I just want to flag that point. I'd like to see all the consultation done and provided to the traffic committee before we go ahead, or even brought to council, whatever needs to be done, so that we don't pass the technical committee and find out the residents don't want it.
All right, Councillor Williams, any further discussion required from your point? Councillor Sanderson, one moment, please, Councillor. Please go ahead. You have a question?
No, I wanted to support the motion that Councillor Williams has put forward. Make the point that to some extent the former Public Transport Traffic Advisory Committee used to do this work of consultation with community. We've missed that since that committee was dissolved. I agree there's a space there that needs to be filled for that sort of consultation to take place, whether it's at council or at another committee. But the consultation is absolutely essential. As to the point of these reports not having enough information for council to be able to deal with, I mean, I've raised this issue before. I can recall instances before where we've had recommendations from the public or from the local traffic committee about, I think there was one to do with the crossing at Boronia Park, where there's a recommendation and conclusion, but nothing to describe what it was that they're actually recommending. So I think we need to do a lot more work in this space.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further discussion required, councillors? Councillor Williams, then no further discussion from you. I'll put the recommendation, the amended recommendation. So those in favour, against, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. We move on to 4.12, development applications determined by the Development Control Unit, April 2020. Move Councillor Williams, seconded Councillor Miles. Councillor Williams.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, just a point of clarification through you to the General Manager. The first item there references to Cooya Road, but then in the determination refers to 4 Windia Avenue. I assume that this matter deals with Takuya Road because it then goes on to talk about 10 Takuya Road as an adjoining property. Could that be clarified, please?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the Director of Development.
Through you, Mayor, you're correct. It's a topographical error and they'll be rectified. It's related to 8 Takuya.
Thank you. Also, in relation to the second item, which relates to 33 Levesne Drive, it says in the determination, approved subject to the following conditions, but there's no conditions associated with that.
Through you, Mayor, they're basically standard conditions. I can provide them for you. Those standard conditions as far as hours of operation, lodging, construction certificate. So.
Oh, that's fine. Just refer to them as standard conditions because I'm familiar with those, but there may have been other conditions which aren't specified.
That's noted, and we will. If there's any specific or special conditions, we obviously show them, but the standard conditions, I'll make a note of that. Thank you.
Councillors, any further discussion required? I'll put the recommendation. Those in favour, against, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. 4.13, development applications determined under delegated authority in February and March 2020. Moved Councillor Williams, seconded Councillor Miles. Councillor Williams.
In relation to the second item, which is 9 Vernon Street, I assume we're talking about the famous building under Tarban Creek there. I recall when it went to CAP, and CAP was of the opinion that there needed to be some setback from the seawall to allow the articulation of the historic entrance to that that dry dock area there. Is that included in these recommendations, in this process?
General Manager.
Through Mr. Mayor to the Director.
Oh no, sorry, I'm talking about 1 Ruby Road. Sorry.
1 Ruby Road. Yep.
Through you, Mayor, on page 338, it talks about this, the boathouse that's needs to be refined and reduced with regard to the scale and size. That's what CAP highlighted as well.
Yes, but does that include setting it back from the seawall? Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the General.
I can have to come back to you on the detail and with some plans.
Thank you.
Councillors, any further discussion required? I'll put the recommendation, receive and note. Those in favour, against, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. 4.14, development applications determined by the Development Control Unit, March 2020. Councillor Miles, seconded Councillor McLaughlin. Councillor Miles. No need. Any councillors? Any discussion required on this matter? I'll put the recommendation. I'm sorry, I was a bit quick. Councillor Williams.
It's just again the issue of trees, Mr. Mayor. We're replacing substantial trees with the recommendations of 5 and 6 metre high things. On page 352, there's reference to a tree removal, but as the previous ones also provide a replacement tree, I was just wondering, in Con 50 tree removal, there's no reference there to replacement, and it refers to trees in the earlier part of the approval. So I was just wondering, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the General Manager, what's required there.
General Manager?
Through Mr. Mayor to the Director of Development.
It's on, just clarify through you, that's item 4.14.
Where are we? Item 4.14. Yes, on page 352. It refers earlier in the proposal to trees. Then on page 52, 352, it makes reference to a tree, but there's no reference there to a replacement tree. I was just wondering if there is a replacement tree proposed for that.
It's a review of determination. It's a deferred commencement, and they have to provide the detail before they have the consent. So we need the landscape plan to identify what trees are going to be put on the subject site with this new works.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Have we got to move in a second? So, it's late. Any further discussion required? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, against, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Move on to 4.15. The development application is determined under Delegated Authority in April 2020. Councillor Williams, seconded. Councillor Miles. Councillor Williams.
No comment, Mr. Mayor. I think that's self-explanatory.
Thank you. Councillors, any further discussion required on this? I'll put the motion. Those, the recommendation. Those in favour, against, that's carried. That's unanimous. So thank you very much. Is there any general business? Any matters for general business, please, Councillor? Councillor Williams.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, just for Council's information, just to advise Council that I've been nominated and appointed as the Local Government New South Wales representative to the Sydney Water Customer Council for a 3-year term. I look
Congratulations.
Forward, yes, I look forward to making a contribution for improving water delivery and waste management sustainability in our metropolitan area.
I'm sure you will. Congratulations. That's great news. Good to have a representative there. Thank you. Councillors, any further discussion? Any other matters for general business? I'll declare the meeting closed at 8:36. Thank you, councillors, and good night.